Hello, my name's Richard Felix, and over the past 10 years I've been taking ghost tours around some of the most haunted places in England. What better place to start a tour of haunted Lincolnshire than here in the centre of Lincoln, with Lincoln Cathedral at the back of me. But I'm now standing in front of the statue of Alfred Lord Tennyson, one of Lincolnshire's most famous sons. And what better than a quote from one of his poems? Not half a league onwards, not the charge of the Light Brigade, but this quotation from The Ring. A footstep, a low throbbing in the walls, a noise of falling weights that never fell, weird whispers, bells that rang without a hand, door handles turned when none was at the door, and bolted doors that opened of themselves. So, settle back, give us your full attention, turn down the lights, and let us take you on a tour of haunted Lincolnshire. It's strange how Lincoln claims so many firsts and oldists to do with Europe, but here we are in front of Lincoln Cathedral, the finest medieval cathedral possibly in the whole of Europe. A landmark perched on top of the hill during the whole of the Second World War for the bomber crews that were stationed at many of the airfields in Lincolnshire. And it does have a tiny ghost story, a monk that stands on the steps of the cathedral, turns round and wanders back through the door. That's as good as it gets, but there's a much better story inside the cathedral, so let's go in and have a look. And I'm now inside Lincoln Cathedral, one of the most fantastic cathedrals in the whole of Great Britain. There is a ghost story, but that's outside the building. But inside here, I've come to look for the Lincoln Imp. He's up there somewhere. He was once a real demon blown into Lincoln during a tremendous storm, and he occupied the cathedral, causing mayhem, dancing on the altar, tripping over the bishop, the verger, and playing havoc with the choir. So the guardian angels of the cathedral turned him into stone, and he was positioned halfway up that pillar, and there he is to this day, a tiny, tiny little gargoyle, but one of the most famous myths and legends in the world. And I'm standing at the bottom of Steep Hill. This was originally known as the Jewry, and behind me, one of the oldest houses in the whole of Europe, the Jew's house. It's haunted. It was originally the home of Solomon of Wallingford, but he was clipping the king's coin and he was hanged for it. The house was forfeit. It's now a very, very fine restaurant, and they tell me that they have hauntings on the top floor and in the attics, footsteps going up the stairs, and a couple of tourists standing about here taking a photograph of the building. They took 3 photographs. The second of 3 photographs had a knight in armour standing in front of the house. And next door, in the Jew's court, a little boy was thrown down a well and drowned. And many years later, they found the body of that little boy. And they say that he still haunts the courtyard of the Jew's court to this very day. And I'm still in Lincoln, walking up, would you believe, Steep Hill. And I'm arriving now at Brown's Restaurant and Pie Shop. And would you believe, they've got a ghost. But I don't think it's the ghost of Sweeney Todd. But let's go in and have a look. And I'm now inside Brown's Pie Shop. We're down in the basement, and with me, Sandy, you're the proprietor.
I am indeed.
And things have happened here, yes?
I've been here 15 years. I've been here. and there's quite a lot's happened, yeah.
Really? Yeah.
And it tends to take on quite simple things like boxes moving and pictures moving, and people who have been here, who have had sort of knowledge of these things, I've said people have stood next to them.
Down here?
Down here in this little basement, yeah, and also in the main restaurant. Although the boxes tend to move up the stairs in the attic, we've got an old attic which is quite sort of scary. But the scariest thing that happened to me was I was cooking one day. It's a few years ago now, maybe that's why I've gone grey, and we had a big noise down the stairs, and I came down from quite a busy morning's work to check out what the noise was.
Yeah.
Because I was on my own that day, and our kitchens are quite old, but we had this big steel bench. It's quite a wide steel bench, and when I went back up the stairs, there was absolutely nothing in the restaurant. When I went back up the stairs, one of my largest cook's knives was sticking point first into the floor and was wavering backwards and forwards, and it concerned me a little bit.
Someone had in fact thrown it and stuck it into the ground, or unseen hands or something had done it. That's a bit serious.
Because it was only about 4 feet off on a bench about 4 feet high, and I don't know how it could have stuck in the floor, just dropping off. There was no vibration to make it drop off or anything.
Wow.
So that just happened. But luckily, it's all been. All the rest of the things have been very sort of simple and not very frightening.
But it's mainly movement. Things move. So
movement, yeah.
it sounds as if you've got a poltergeist.
Well,
which you never
old,
see them,
yeah.
you see.
Well, it's a very old building, and
of course,
you know, the area is very atmospheric, and there's the cathedral and the castle, and the buildings are all very old.
All around you, of course.
There must have been lots of things happen in this building, and I imagine over the years.
Yeah, and you've even given him a name.
Yeah, we call him Humphrey.
Really? No reason for that other than a sort of an affectionate nickname, is it?
I think it's like something that we inherited from our previous landlord, who he had a lot of things happen to him as well, boxes move.
Yeah.
And I think he called him Humphrey, so we've inherited that, and now it's become like the name.
Absolutely.
I don't know if it's a lad or what it is, or a man or what it is, but it's just something.
It's certainly around, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, it's around, definitely around, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Sandy, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And I'm now inside Lincoln Prison. This was the assize town, and any executions that were to take place in the county of Lincolnshire took place here. Up until 1816, it was on the back of a wagon. A horse drew away the wagon and the person was left swinging in the breeze. But after 1816, all the public executions at Lincoln took place at the top of this place here, Cobb Hall. I'm following in the footsteps of all the accused that came up these stairs on their last journey before being publicly executed here on the top of these battlements, looking out on Lincoln Cathedral, their last view before their death took place, more or less on this spot here. They were hanged on what was called the New Drop, a platform with a trapdoor, and still preserved here are some of the original scaffold fittings for securing it. 35 men and 3 women were hanged here where I'm standing now, with a vast crowd of people looking up from down below. The gallows would be quite high, at least 10 feet high, so they could be seen above these battlements. They would stand here, entertain the crowd. A couple of psalms, a prayer, and of course their will, their testament, and stating whether they were either innocent or guilty. Then the white cap would be pulled down over their face. The executioner would pull the lever, and they would be launched into eternity on this very spot where I'm standing now. The last execution took place here on this spot in 1859, and after that all executions took place inside the prison, within the grounds of the prison. Then, to signify the execution, the death bell would be rung and a black flag would be raised from above the prison gates to signify that person was hanged. On many occasions when the wind's howling, people still hear the footsteps of the condemned padding up the staircase that I've just walked up. And they also hear the creaking of the lever and the slam of the door as the trapdoor opens here on this very spot at Lincoln. And standing here on the rather high battlements at Lincoln Castle, over there the courts, still used to this day. And the red brick building, part of the old prison. That's the women's section and part of the chapel. Behind that, the exercise yards and part of the older bit of the prison. There is said to be the ghost of a white lady that still wanders around the red brick building. Of course, remember, that was part of the women's prison. Whether she is a tormented soul, one that died under tragic circumstances, we're not sure. Because certain ghosts, I believe, are actually no more than a recording. They're not really there at all. They died under tragic, traumatic, premature conditions. Murders, suicides, executions, battles. And I believe that because their time hadn't come, that the actual recording just before their death can be, for want of a better word, emblazoned, recorded into the fabric of the building. The stone, the bricks, the mortar, possibly even the soil. And then for some reason we see that recording again, just as if someone had pressed the replay button of a recorder, of a video player. It's seen again, it's always seen in exactly the same position as it was seen at the time of death. So if they're legless or headless, it's because the building's changed. Either the ceiling is lower than it was at the time of death, or the floor is now higher, which of course cuts them off at the knee and makes them appear legless. And I'm now, for the first time in my life, inside a prison chapel. And I'm going up to the pulpit. Before an execution took place, the condemned person would have pride of place in front of the congregation, standing in front of an upright, open coffin. Probably the coffin he'd made or she'd made in the prison the week before their execution. They were then taken out, of course, and executed from this place. But here, these pews are special because each one of them are coffin-shaped. And they say that it was done on purpose by the prisoners who built this to remind them that the only way most of them would ever come out of this place was in a coffin. And may the Lord have mercy on their souls. I'm in Westgate, in the centre of Lincoln, outside the Strugglers Inn. It's called the Strugglers because it's in view of the castle and the area where the public executions took place. Until a Lincolnshire executioner called William Marwood introduced the long drop, which broke the neck, men and women struggled for up to a quarter of an hour before they finally expired, much convulsed. And there is a ghost story here at the pub. A Norton Disney poacher called William Clark was a regular at this pub. He shot a gamekeeper in the legs. The gamekeeper died of gangrene, and William Clark was hanged for his murder. Before he was hanged, he presented his lurcher dog to the landlord, William Roberts. Roberts kept the dog for many years, and when it died, he had it stuffed and mounted, and it was displayed until the early 1970s in the bar. On a cold, windy night, many of the regulars of this pub say that even to this day, while they're standing at the bar with their pints, they can sense a large dog brush past their legs. Is that William Clark's lurcher? No one will ever know. And we're now on Skegness train station. The number of visitors and tourists from all over the East Midlands that came here on their holidays. And of course, there's a ghost story. In the 1970s, a young lad called Mark, whose hobby was train spotting, amongst other things, spent many, many hours on this station. Most of his family worked for British Rail, and so most of the people that were here knew him very well. And when he had his homework to do, he used to go and sit on the empty trains and do his homework, which of course kept his mum and dad happy, and of course his teachers happy, and him as well, because he was working in surroundings that he liked very much. One winter's afternoon he was sitting on the Shrewsbury excursion train, which had 3 hours before it left, and it was here on platform 6. He was sitting minding his own business in an empty carriage doing his homework when he heard a noise in the corridor. He got up to see what the noise was and stepped out into the corridor to see a very old lady wearing an old-fashioned purple dress. She had a very drawn and haggard face. She was standing there looking bewildered. He went up to her and asked her where she was going. She didn't speak to him. She didn't know he was there. He turned away for a second and looked back, and in that split second she'd vanished. Now, no athletic person could have disappeared as quick as that. Mark got off the train and walked up and down the platform looking for the old lady. She was nowhere to be seen, and the departure gates were still firmly locked. There was no way that she could have got off that platform without Mark seeing her. And to this very day, Mark isn't really sure whether what he saw on that train here on platform 6 was a ghost or not. But what else could it have been? And here I am outside the Vine Hotel, almost in the middle of Skegness. This building goes back to the 1600s. Was an old inn, certainly back as far as 1770, and in those days the sea was much closer. In fact, it came right up to Drummond Road. There's stories of ghosts, there's murders that took place, and Alfred Lord Tennyson lived here. So let's go inside, see what we can find. And there's a wonderful ghost story in here, so let's go searching. This is the rather splendid interior, the hallway of the Vine. And early last century they were opening up part of this wall to put this display cabinet in, and much to the builder's shock and horror, they found a skeleton here in the wall, completely bricked up. No one realised who or what the person was. It was a male, but it had got part of a blue uniform still on the skeleton. And when they examined the buttons closely, they realised that he was a long dead member of the Customs and Excise. And of course, due to the close proximity of the Vine to the sea in those days, he was here investigating smugglers. He obviously found some, they murdered him, and to hide what they'd done, they buried him here in the wall. And he still wanders. Many members of staff have seen him wandering along this corridor, in and out of the rooms, and he's also been seen upstairs, and one of the bedrooms is very haunted. So we'll go up there and have a look. And I'm now in the corridor, directly above the area where the customs man was bricked up. He is, or was, literally right underneath. And room number 8 here, one of the suspect bedrooms, newly refurbished. We'll go in and have a look. And it's in this room where people have come down from the night before, and before breakfast gone to reception, and asked, who was that strange man that was in our bedroom? That man dressed in an 18th century uniform that was standing in here and just disappeared. In the 1860s, the Vine was also a well-known hostelry, and a murder took place not far from here. A murder committed by a man that was more accustomed to saving life than taking it. Samuel Moody was a part-time fisherman and member of the lifeboat here at Skegness. He was here with 2 friends, and they were on a boozing spree. They spent 7 hours in here drinking, and left in the early hours of the morning and set off back towards Skegness. They stopped at a place called Smith's Corner and continued talking And then one of the three, David Howard, left and went home. The other two, Samuel Moody and Elisha Lynn, continued talking for a long time, quite friendly, which was strange because although they were supposedly friends, they had a bit of a love-hate relationship. They were often arguing, they were often fighting. Eventually, one of the two went home, but the other never got there. And the following afternoon, an 11-year-old boy discovered the body of Elisha Lynn lying in a dike at Smith's Corner. He had been dragged physically through a hedge and dropped into the dike, and he was lying partly submerged in the water. He unfortunately had a very thin skull, and obviously the two men had started fighting. Moody had hit him and fractured his skull. He then dragged him while he was still alive and dropped him into the water, where he drowned. They visited Moody's house and found him still wet through with a large cut on the side of his face. He was arrested and tried for murder. He told them that it was self-defence, that the two of them had had a fight. But of course the problem was that he'd actually dragged the body while it was still alive and dropped it into the water rather than trying to save it. He then went home. He said he couldn't remember any of it because he was drunk, but perhaps if he'd gone home, then remembered and come back, he may still have saved him. A plea of leniency was asked for, and he was not sentenced for murder. He was sentenced instead for manslaughter, and he spent 15 years in prison. And the ghost of Elisha Lynn still wanders around Smith's Corner to this day. Alfred Lord Tennyson also haunts the Vine. He lived here. He wrote "Come into the garden, Maud," here in this garden. They say underneath a tree, which is almost gone. This is all that's left of it, the tree stump. And inside the building, people on frequent occasions, mainly the staff, see an old man with a white beard walking down the corridor, and he's accompanied by two large dogs. And they say it's the ghost of Tennyson, who still haunts his house. And this is Boston, heart of the Fenland. I'm standing in front of a fantastic old 16th century timber framed building. This would have been here when the plague came to Boston in 1585. It was believed to have been started by a woman called Mrs. Preston. She married a Boston merchant. He was years older than her. She was a very good-looking woman, and she had an insatiable appetite for young men. He left on a boat from Boston to go to King's Lynn on a business trip, and as soon as he left, she started writing to some of her favourite suitors to tell them to come and visit her. There she was sitting upstairs writing when she heard gravel thrown at the window, and it was a young man, a friend of a friend who'd been told to visit. She let him in, they spent the night together, and he left the following morning. Unbeknown to her, he'd brought the plague, or the Black Death, with him. She soon started to develop blotches on her hands, and she ran into the middle of the town here of Boston, screaming that the plague had come. Over 460 people died here at Boston and are buried in plague pits around the town. This is where the undead and the living dead stories come from. People being buried alive, because one of the symptoms of the Black Death was a long deep sleep or a coma before death. And in those days, of course, as soon as people were believed to be dead, they were taken out of the house and buried as quick as possible. And there are reports here in some of the graveyards of hands appearing out of the soil, or people standing around the coffin, the mourners all quiet, and all of a sudden the lid started to lift and the person climbed out of the coffin still alive. This is now a sign of the times, has become spookies, body piercing. No ghost that I know of in here, but there are stories about the Boston Stump, and I'm told that I can climb right up to the top of that tower and have a look. So let's go. Let's have a climb. And I'm poised at the bottom of the spiral staircase going up the Boston Stump. I've been told not to run for the first 100 steps, and I'm certainly not going to do that. But I can actually hear the wind thundering up the tower. I'm not sure what to expect when I get there, but we'll soon see. So let's go and have a look. I'm nearly at the top. I'm just about worn out, and that wind that's howling, I've never heard anything like it. I'm not a great lover of heights, and I've never known anything quite like this. I'm halfway up the Boston Stump, and the story is that St. Botolph actually founded his monastery here on this site where the stump is now, and on frequent occasions he preached sermons to the devil on this spot. The devil could do very little about it, and the wind that still howls round this stump is reputed to be the devil huffing and puffing in exasperation because he could do nothing about St. Botolph's incessant preaching here. And I've had enough. It's a very long way down there. I'm getting out of here and going down. Oh boy, what a long way down. There's also a legend that a young woman in white is seen every autumn throwing herself off this tower and floating down rather quickly and hitting the ground. How she managed, or how she dared to even get close enough to this parapet to actually throw herself off, I don't know. They also tell me that in the actual main part of the church down below, the organist has actually seen a figure walking along the central aisle when there's only him been in there. And they say that he's the most down-to-earth, reliable sort of person that just would not, in his wildest dreams, make up ghost stories. And just standing here, looking at the graffiti all over the walls of the brave people that came up here, including J. Huggins in 1789. But I've had enough. It's time for me to make a sharp exit. I'm going to leave the wind, the devil, and St. Botolph to it, and I'm going back down. In 1693, Henry Stone of Skellingthorpe was buried here, in this huge tombstone. Before he died, he insisted that his grave be placed as close to the wall of the church as possible. He had a very good reason for this. In 1690, Henry was out for a walk with his faithful dog, and a tremendous thunderstorm arose. Henry and the dog took shelter underneath a large oak tree. The dog, on 3 occasions, grabbed hold of Henry's hand with its mouth and pulled him away from the oak tree. Henry kept going back under to take shelter, but the dog kept insisting. And on the 4th attempt, the dog dragged him away from the tree, and a bolt of lightning hit the tree. The tree exploded and crashed to the ground, killing a pheasant that was also taking shelter in the tree. Had that faithful dog not have pulled Henry away from that tree, Henry also would have died. Henry had a painting done of the oak tree, the dog and the pheasant, and that painting is still on show in the blue drawing room of Darlington Hall. Henry was buried here in 1693. His dog outlived him, and he's buried in unconsecrated ground just on the other side of Henry's tomb, Unfortunately now, the whole area has been concreted over. There is no monument and no stone to that faithful dog. But on frequent occasions, people wandering around here with their dogs say that they see a large black dog sitting panting by the side of Henry's grave. This is the B1190. It's now known as Tom Otter's Lane. It joins Doddington to Saxelby here in Lincolnshire. In 1806, a Nottinghamshire navvy called Tom Otter got a girl called Mary Kirkham pregnant. He was already married, but the authorities didn't know that, and they forced him to marry Mary. 2 parish constables actually attended the wedding to make sure that it took place. He wasn't too keen on the idea, but he went through with it regardless. The following day, the 2 of them set out to Lincoln, but unfortunately Mary never made it. She was found the following morning on this road somewhere, battered to death by a hedge post. Tom Otter was soon arrested and taken to Lincoln prison. He was tried and sentenced to hang for murder. Because he was a murderer, part of the sentence was that he be gibbeted near the scene of the crime. This was to make a difference between people that were hanged for either stealing a sheep or poaching or burglary, to make it worse, because everyone in those days, just as today, craved a decent burial. Well, of course, if you were hung up in a metal cage for many years, then your body wasn't whole as bits started to drop off it, and you did not get that decent burial. Tom Otter was so outraged at what was going to happen to him that the blacksmith who came into the prison to measure him for his last suit, the gibbet cage, he couldn't do it because Otter was so violent. They made a cage anyway, but it wasn't quite big enough, and after Otter had been hanged, they had to cram him into the cage, and they hung him up here 30 foot high and left him to be pecked at by the crows. When the body started to decompose and the flesh started to fall off the jawbone, a blue tit nested inside Tom Otter's mouth and had some young blue tits, and a little poem was composed that goes something like this: 9 tongues within one head, the 10th went out to seek for bread, to feed the living within the dead. Tom Otter's body was hung up here for 44 years until it was eventually blown down with the gibbet post in 1850. The remains of his bones were buried beneath the gibbet post, and the gibbet cage, or parts of the gibbet cage, are still on display to this day at Darlington Hall, just up the road. And people say that anyone walking along this road at night, when the wind is howling, can still hear the creaking of the gibbet post and the rattling of the chains that held up Tom Otter here all those years ago. I'm now at Doddington. I'm in Doddington churchyard, and over the wall is Doddington Hall. It's in between Skellingthorpe and Tom Otter's Lane. In this hall is housed the remains of the gibbet, the metal pieces belonging to Tom Otter, and also in there in the blue drawing room is the painting of Henry Stone's, with the oak tree, the dog and the pheasant on it. But surprisingly enough, Darlington Hall is haunted as well. They have a screaming lady that every autumn is seen throwing herself from the roof and crashes to the ground. They say that she is avoiding someone who was making a pass at her in the hall. There's also a brown lady that appears to new brides at the hall. But they say she's a friendly lady. She appears in the bedroom, smiles at the bride and disappears. I presume that she's a long dead member of the family that still haunts the place and is welcoming the new mistress to the hall. Behind me, the happy sound of children at play at a school on the Birchwood estate, 3 miles from the centre of Lincoln, where once was the sound of heavy bomber and Merlin engine. This was Skellingthorpe Aerodrome, home for many years of the ill-fated Manchester bomber. The number of aircrews that died while training in that aircraft here at Skellingthorpe gave rise to the number of ghostly occurrences that took place while the houses were being built. Poltergeist activity, things being thrown around, and the number of exorcisms that had to be done on this estate. But happily, things have calmed down now. The airfield was closed down in 1950 and lay derelict for many years. In 1970, a lady with her fiancé and some friends visiting the airfield took, for want of a better word, a trip back in time. She was standing looking towards the control tower and suddenly heard the sound of Merlin engines, the clatter and banging of mechanics, and she actually saw a Lancaster bomber, and it was being kitted out and bombed up by a crew. She saw an airman sitting on top of a bomb carrier. She then saw a ghostly funeral taking place, and apparently that was the funeral of that member of the bombing crew that was blown up when one of the bombs exploded. She saw her fiancé walking down one of the perimeter tracks. She called to him, but he couldn't hear her. On the arm, and she came back to reality. Everything disappeared, and she believes that she actually saw a glimpse back into the past. She saw a little bit of the past history of RAF Skellingthorpe. RAF Scampton, home of the legendary Red Arrows, and would you believe, going past me now, the Red Arrows. There's not a lot I can say at this moment until they've gone. RAF Scampton, during the war of course, was famous for the Dam Busters, Guy Gibson, Lancaster bombers, and of course his famous black Labrador dog, Nigger. These old airfields host the phantoms of many airmen. The scenes are replayed over and over again of many, many crashes that took place in training, and of course many, many aircraft coming back after raids. RAF Scampton is most definitely haunted. On frequent occasions at certain times of the year, people say that they still hear the ghostly droning of Merlin engines. A black dog has been seen on many occasions here, and it's believed to be the ghost of Nigger Guy Gibson's pet Labrador that was killed the night that Gibson was on the Dam Busters raid. When he returned home, his faithful dog unfortunately had been run over on the main road outside Scampton Camp. He's buried inside the airfield somewhere, and on frequent occasions officers in the officers' mess have said they've seen a ghostly dog. And near to Echo Dispersal, a corporal of the military police, the Air Force Police, was on patrol one night and he saw haze and mist drifting over the old dispersal. The sodium lights were very bright and it gave a rather spooky atmosphere. Then he saw what he believed to be either a dog in the distance or a cat that was actually closer. He wasn't sure which. It was padding across the dispersal. It frightened him a lot. And then he looked to the left and realised that it was right next to Nigger's grave. Just another of the many sightings of the ghost of that faithful Labrador here at RAF Scampton. And here we are at RAF Wickedly, home of 12 Squadron and 626 Squadron. And with me is Julia. You actually used to live here, didn't you, in this... Well, it's the original... It's not called a control tower, is it?
No, the watchtower.
Yeah, watchtower. I must get that right while I'm in Lincolnshire. Did things happen to you here?
We had a couple of things happen, yes. We had one time, very early in the morning, it was a really bright morning, 8 o'clock. I was washing up downstairs and the telephone rang. Somebody wanted some information which I couldn't give them. I needed to ask the flying instructor. He'd gone down to the hangars to check the aircraft, so I was waiting for him, and I could hear the door very easily from where I was. It was open access. And I just carried on, and the door went and somebody came upstairs, and I just assumed it was the flying instructor who'd returned. So I just came out, trotted up the stairs to find him, to get this information, to ring the guy back, and there was nothing up here. And I definitely heard the door open and somebody walk up the stairs.
I mean, you can't be mistaken over things
no, I mean,
as ordinary as...
Like.
Yeah.
And it was very definite, and it was really nice though. It was a really nice feeling.
Yeah.
You just sort of thought, ooh, there is somebody.
They are, that's the thing. People expect them to be evil and it's at night when the wind's howling and...
The whole atmosphere here is busy. There's something going on. You know, sometimes in your house you feel sometimes I'm by myself. Yeah. You never get that here because there's people here.
Really,
yeah,
but if you can imagine the what went on in here from 1942.
It's a very strong feeling sometimes. Very good atmosphere here.
Yeah. What about the dog?
Oh, the dog is
on cue. Good girl.
Yes. She went through a phase when she first came that she wouldn't go down to the hangars.
Yeah.
She would just stop and come back here. She didn't seem to like it. She just stopped dead. And then one evening, I actually got her onto the runways and it was pitch dark. And I took her for a walk down to the end of the runway, or tried to, and she sat down and stopped and she wouldn't come back to come with me. And I continued and I was calling her and she'd come sort of 3 yards and then stop again. And I carried on, and then she actually came and sat on my feet, which she's never done before or since. And I just thought it'd been a silly dog. Just carried on, and she did it again. And she sat right across my feet, and I just got the distinct impression I am not supposed to carry on down the runway. So, and then I got really frightened, so I just turned around and we both ran really fast back down the runway in the dark, because it was just such a strong feeling of, you know, you're not supposed to carry on. Yeah.
But dogs, of course, can sense it so much more than we can.
Another thing she did actually was we were all sat watching television downstairs. We used to have a TV downstairs, and suddenly she jumped up. She was sitting in the settee. She jumped up, and there was something presumably in the corner, and there was nothing as far as we could see. It was just a bare corner, nothing in it at all. And she growled like the blazes at this corner, and there was something. And then she went and hid behind the settee.
Really?
So what it was, I don't know.
So she could see it, sense it, or
that she thought was there.
Good Lord.
It was quite odd.
There's also a story, of course, of a suicide of a WAF, is there here? That you've actually got records of that, haven't you?
Yes, we have. I have the records here of the Wickedly Register, the Squadron Association for 12 and 626 Squadron, and that is actually recorded in the records. It's also documented as well, or I've heard it from the person who was the radio operator in here, a lady called Donnie Spooner, And she actually told me that definitely that was true. There was a WAF who killed herself because of her fiance. It was not coming back. He'd been killed in an operation somewhere.
Really?
So that's true.
And so she obviously still haunts the building across the road where she, I presume, committed the suicide.
Yes, that's the local story.
Gosh, what about the headless cyclist?
Yes, there's supposed to be a headless cyclist. I've not seen him, but there is supposed to be a headless cyclist which goes along the taxiways. But again, I found that in the records that is a true story due to the asymmetry and torque from the engines, the propellers of the Lancaster. You have to have the left-hand engines on fuller throttle than the right-hand engines, otherwise it just swings to the left and pulls up. And somebody didn't do this, they got it wrong. The aircraft pulled up and went across the runway off onto the taxiway, and unfortunately this poor chap was just cycling past the end and it just took his head off.
Oh my goodness.
But that's actually did happen because it's in there.
So we're talking of real facts, things that really happened here, and his ghost supposedly seen riding along the trackway.
Yes.
That is fantastic.
So it's quite a good story.
Lovely one, Julia, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And this place just has to be the epitome of a haunted Lincolnshire airfield. This was RAF Wickedly, home of 455 Squadron. Just look at the old deserted control tower. I used to come here well over 30 years ago with my brother. We used to dig up crashed aeroplanes, and I spent many a happy hour on this airfield and quite a long time inside this control tower that was derelict even in those days. I used to come in here and stand upstairs on my own, and I haven't been back for over 30 years. This is quite a nostalgic trip for me. There's graffiti now all over the interior of the building. There was a staircase that used to take us up to the top, and I wonder if it's still intact. It may well be. It is. It's here. And I'm going to take a trip up after 30 years. As I say, this was home of 455 Squadron, an Australian squadron. They had Hampden bombers here. My father was stationed here during the war, and he used to tell us of a story of a Wellington bomber that was very badly shot up by German anti-aircraft fire, and he could make it no farther than back here to Wigsley, and he crash landed just off the runway. My father had to go to that plane and take the radio equipment out of it. He said the smell of death inside it was terrible. There was blood all over the floor and the remains of morphine that had been given someone injections, and it turned out that it was the wireless operator that was very badly wounded in the stomach, and he died in Newark Hospital. Many people, of course, have reported seeing an airman walking around Wigsley Airfield, as they have reported seeing for so many more of the airfields that litter the Lincolnshire scenery, most of them haunted. But it's wonderful to be back here in this old control tower, still intact. And what better way to finish the video on haunted Lincolnshire than to read a rather incredible poem that appears in the incredible books that are produced called Ghost Stations. It's called The Watchers, and strangely enough there's a picture of an old derelict control tower. The old airfield tower stands alone, every door and window gone. Neglect and years have shown the way to dereliction and decay. Yet here within are old echoes, whispers, movement, soft and low. From deep in a time, a woman weeps for a lover in eternal sleep. The ghosts are gathered, I can feel, close behind me, at my heel. Through briars seek to slow my pace. I must hurry from this haunted place, where the guardroom stood, a rusting plough. Only crackling hens parade here now, a few more steps into the lane. then the washers can close ranks again. And now, up the stairs again, to the very top floor of the control tower. The wind howling and whistling. Through the windows here, fantastic panoramic view. Of course, in the poem it stated many of the airfields have been left for the chickens, but not so here at Wigsley. Wigsley has been left to the ghosts, the memories, and to the pigs.